The chandelier gleamed, the Victoria ballroom dripping with wealth, but my father's voice sliced through it all like a blade through my chest. I'm proud of all my children, except her. The words burned, each one a fresh wound, ripping open 8 years of scars from Kandahar's dust and blood. Every face turned, their smug Canadian smiles mocking me, the reject, the soldier who dared come home. My fist clenched the wine glass, trembling, ready to shatter it into his perfect Fraser legacy. He didn't even flinch, just raised his Okanagan Valley Pinot and sneered, like I was nothing but a ghost haunting his empire. I'd faced death, but this? This was betrayal that tore my soul apart, a pain so raw I could barely breathe. I didn't scream. I stood, seething, ready to burn it all down, and this is where my fight begins. I stepped out of the rental car, boots crunching on the gravel driveway of my childhood home in Oak Bay, Victoria. The cedar-sided house loomed, all 4,000 square feet of it, with a manicured lawn stretching 50 meters to the Salish Sea's edge, the Canadian flag snapping in the coastal wind. 8 years in the Canadian forces, dodging IEDs in Kandahar, and this place still felt like a trap. I'd called ahead, out of duty, not hope. My mother, Elizabeth Fraser, texted back, "William doesn't know you're coming. Let's keep it quiet, eh?" No warmth, just damage control. I didn't reply. My duffel bag held my discharge papers and a meritorious service medal, earned in a desert half a world away. Nobody here would care. The front door creaked open before I could knock. Elizabeth, in her pressed linen dress, pearls gleaming like a Victoria socialite's armor, pulled me into a stiff hug. "You look strong," she whispered, eyes flicking to the house. "He's in his study." My father, William Fraser, real estate tycoon, was always in control. I pushed past her, the smell of pine cleaner hitting me like a memory of being invisible. Down the hall, I stopped at his study door. William glanced up from his laptop, his gray eyes cold as a January tide. "Back already?" he said, voice flat. "Thought you'd stay out there playing hero." "I'm done serving," I said, gripping my duffel. "Just got discharged." "Honorable." He snorted, leaning back. "Honorable, eh? Hope you didn't come expecting a parade." I didn't answer. My brother Nathan, the golden son, was probably off polishing his campaign signs for city council. My sister Sophie, the family saint, was likely at some charity gala. This house, this family, it was their stage, not mine. I was Emma Mackenzie Fraser, 32 years old, and I was already regretting walking through that door. The dining room in our Oak Bay home glowed under a chandelier that cost more than my old army jeep. The table, a 3-meter slab of polished Douglas fir, was set for a feast: wild BC salmon gravlax, roasted root vegetables from Cowichan Valley, and Okanagan Valley Pinot Noir in crystal glasses that caught the light like a lie. I stood at the threshold, still in my Canadian Forces uniform, the meritorious service medal pinned to my chest. The weight of it felt heavier than the 20-kilogram rucksack I'd carried through Kandahar. My mother, Elizabeth Fraser, fussed with the table settings, her pearl earrings glinting as she avoided my gaze. My father, William Fraser, sat at the head, his navy blazer pressed as sharp as his ego. My brother Nathan, the rising star of Victoria's city council, lounged to his right, scrolling his phone. Sophie, the family's golden child, sat across from him, her smile as curated as her charity gala speeches. I took my seat, the chair creaking under me like it knew I didn't belong. "Nice to see you finally showed up," Nathan said, not looking up from his screen. His tailored suit screamed privilege, the kind I'd never known. "What, no parade for the war hero?" His smirk was a blade, and I felt it twist. "Parades are for people who need applause," I shot back, my voice low but steady. "I'm good." William cleared his throat, his gray eyes flicking to my uniform. "That get-up's a bit much, don't you think? This isn't a Remembrance Day ceremony." His tone was ice, the kind that freezes you out before you even realize you're shivering. "It's my uniform," I said, fingers brushing the metal. "Earned it. Figured I'd wear it." He snorted, sipping his wine. "Earned it, Hope you didn't come here expecting a medal from me. Elizabeth's hand froze mid-air, a silver fork dangling. William, let's just enjoy dinner, she said, her voice tight, like she was defusing a bomb. She always played peacemaker, but never for me. The servers brought out the first course, and the conversation shifted to Nathan's campaign. We're polling at 65%, he boasted, swirling his glass. Victoria's ready for real leadership. Sophie chimed in about her latest fundraiser for the local women's shelter, her voice dripping with practiced humility. I stayed quiet, cutting my salmon into precise squares, each slice a way to keep my hands from shaking. The room buzzed with their self-congratulation, a symphony of egos that drowned out the clink of cutlery. My military service, my 8 years of dodging bullets and hauling supplies through war zones, didn't even get a footnote. Then William stood, raising his glass, his smile as polished as the table. To my children, he said, his voice booming like he was addressing a boardroom. To Nathan, carrying the Fraser name forward with vision. To Sophie, making a difference with grace. He paused, his eyes sliding past me like I was a ghost. I'm proud of all my children who make us proud, well, most of them. The room went still. Nathan's smirk widened. Sophie looked down at her plate. Elizabeth's fork clattered against her glass, but she didn't speak. The words hit like a mortar round, the kind that leaves no visible wounds but shatters everything inside. My chest burned, the air too thick to breathe. Every guest, cousins, family friends, some random Victoria elite, stared, their pity worse than their laughter. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the silence scream louder than I ever could. Then I stood, my chair scraping the hardwood floor. I picked up my wine glass, the red liquid catching the chandelier's glow. To family values, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a bayonet. I tilted the glass, pouring the Pinot Noir into the potted orchid beside me. The dark liquid pooled in the soil, staining the white petals. Gasps rippled through the room. Elizabeth's eyes widened, but she stayed silent. William's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around his own glass. You done with your little show? He said, his voice low, venomous. Not even close, I replied, my heart pounding like a war drum. I turned and walked out, the hallway stretching endlessly before me. The cedar walls seemed to close in, each step echoing the years I'd spent trying to belong in a house that never wanted me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The real fight was coming, and I was already loading my ammo, every memory, every slight, every lie they'd built this family on. This wasn't just dinner. This was the moment I stopped being their scapegoat and started being their reckoning. The weight of my father's words, "Accept her," clung to me like damp coastal fog as I slipped out of the dining room, my boots silent on the hardwood. The Oak Bay house felt like a mausoleum, its cedar walls holding secrets older than me. I needed air, but more than that, I needed answers. The basement door groaned as I descended, the air thick with dust and the faint tang of laundry detergent. A 2-meter shelf sagged under boxes labeled in Elizabeth Fraser's neat cursive, Christmas decor, Nathan's awards, Sophie's gala photos. Nothing for me. My fingers brushed a small, unmarked cedar box tucked behind a broken vacuum. Inside, yellowed envelopes spilled out, tied with a faded red ribbon. My heart thudded like a mortar round as I opened one, the paper brittle under my touch. It was a letter, dated March 1993, in my mother's handwriting. David, she's yours. William can never know. I'm trapped. David Mackenzie. Not William Fraser. My breath caught, sharp as a knife. I sank to the cold concrete floor, the letter trembling in my hands. Another envelope held a faded Polaroid, a younger Elizabeth, smiling weakly in a hospital bed, cradling a newborn, me. Beside her stood a man in a Canadian Navy flight suit, his eyes warm, his hand resting on her shoulder. David Mackenzie, my real father. I flipped the photo over. In faint ink, David met Emma, March 13, 1993. The day I was born. My chest cracked open, pain flooding in like the Salish Sea at high tide. Everything I'd known, every fight, every sneer from William, was because I wasn't his. He'd raised me, but he'd hated me for it, punishing me for a truth I never knew. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and logged into the Secure Forces portal I hadn't touched since my discharge. My genome mapping from Kandahar deployment was still there, a clinical grid of data. I cross-referenced it with a public ancestry database, my fingers fumbling over the screen. The results loaded, no biological match to William Fraser. David Mackenzie, deceased, Canadian Navy pilot, was listed as a 99.8% paternal match. My stomach twisted, the truth a blade I couldn't dodge. I'd spent 8 years proving my worth in war zones, only to come home and find my entire life was a lie. William's cruelty wasn't just coldness, it was vengeance against a daughter who wasn't his. I stumbled out to the backyard, the Pacific breeze sharp against my face. The Salish Sea stretched 10 kilometers in the distance, its waves crashing like my thoughts. I dialed Lauren, my closest friend from the forces, her voice crackling through the line from her Vancouver apartment. "Lauren," I said, my voice breaking, he knew. William knew I wasn't his, and he made me pay for it every single day. "God, Emma," Lauren said, her tone soft but edged with anger. "What kind of man does that to his kid?" "The kind who builds empires on lies," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I found letters. My real dad was David Mackenzie. Navy pilot. Dead before I could walk. There was a pause, the kind that carries weight. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I admitted, my eyes stinging as I stared at the sea. "I've faced bombs, Lauren. But this hurts worse than anything I've ever felt." My voice cracked, the pain raw, like every memory of William's disdain had been sharpened into a single, unbearable wound. I wasn't just the outcast daughter. I was the living proof of a secret Elizabeth buried and William despised. I clutched the Polaroid, David's face a stranger's, yet more familiar than the man who'd raised me. The pain wasn't just betrayal, it was the shattering of my identity, the realization that the family I'd fought to belong to had never wanted me at all. But as the waves roared, something hardened inside me. This wasn't the end. It was the spark for what came next. The pain of that basement discovery, David Mackenzie's name, my mother's secrets, the truth that I wasn't William Fraser's daughter, sat like a 20-kilogram rucksack on my chest, but I wasn't done. I'd survived ambushes in Kandahar, I could survive this. The next morning, I drove 5 kilometers through Victoria's rain-soaked streets to the Greater Victoria Public Library, the Polaroid of David and my mother tucked in my jacket. The library's cedar beams and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the inner harbor, but I barely noticed the view. My mission was surgical: find David Mackenzie, my real father, and unearth the lies William had built his empire on. I sat at a microfiche reader, the hum of the machine steadying my nerves. Scrolling through 1990s editions of the Times Colonist, I found it, a small obituary from 1995, Lieutenant David Mackenzie, Royal Canadian Navy pilot, killed in a training crash off Esquimalt. Survived by his parents in Nanaimo and a brother in Vancouver. No mention of me. My throat tightened, but I kept digging. A follow-up article mentioned David's service, a logistics expert who flew supply missions, known for his quiet courage. I traced his name to a veterans archive at CFB Esquimalt, 8 kilometers away. There, in a dimly lit records room, I found his file. A black and white photo showed him in his flight suit, his eyes, my eyes, steady and kind. A note listed his last posting, HMCS Shearwater, 1993. He died 2 years after I was born, before he could claim me. My fingers lingered on the photo, the pain sharp but grounding. This man, a stranger, had given me more in a faded image than William ever had in 32 years. But pain wasn't enough. I needed ammunition. William's Fraser Foundation, a Victoria darling, reeked of secrets as much as his cedar-lined study did. I called my uncle, James Fraser, the family outcast who'd been pushed out of the business a decade ago. He lived 30 kilometers north in Duncan, running a small coffee roastery off the Trans-Canada Highway. I drove through sheets of rain, the Cowichan Valley's green hills blurring past. James met me at the door, his graying beard and flannel shirt a stark contrast to William's polished blazers. "You look like trouble," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "What do you want, Emma?" "Truth," I said, stepping into his cluttered office, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans. "About William. About what he did to you." James leaned against a 1-meter wooden counter, his eyes narrowing. "He screwed me out of my shares in 2012. Said I mismanaged a Saanich development deal. Had a fake audit ready before I could blink. Forced me to sign an NDA for a payout worth half my stake." "You keep the paperwork?" I asked, my pulse quickening. He smirked, pulling a locked metal box from under the counter. "I'm not as dumb as he thinks." Inside were contracts, emails, and a memo detailing how William funneled foundation donations into offshore accounts tied to Nathan's campaign. My hands shook as I scanned the pages, evidence of fraud, dressed up in legalese. "This enough for you?" James asked. "It's a start," I said, my voice hard as steel. "He's giving a speech at the Fraser Foundation Gala next week, Victoria Conference Center." "I'm crashing it." James raised an eyebrow. "You're poking a grizzly, kid." "Good," I replied. "I've faced worse." Back in my rented SUV, I called Lauren, my anchor from the forces. Her voice crackled from Vancouver. "You got a plan, or you just winging it?" she asked, her dog barking in the background. "Plan," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "I'm taking William's legacy apart, piece by piece. Found proof he's been skimming foundation funds. And I found my real dad, David Mackenzie. He was Navy. Died before I could know him." "Damn," Lauren said softly. "You holding up?" "Barely," I admitted, my voice catching. "But I'm not stopping. William's built his empire on lies, and I'm done letting him erase me." "Then hit him where it hurts," she said. "His reputation." I spent the next 3 days in my hotel room, a cramped 20-square-meter space overlooking Victoria's inner harbor. My laptop glowed with scanned documents from James, cross-referenced with public records from the BC Corporate Registry. William's shell companies were a maze, but I was trained to navigate chaos. By day 4, I had a 50-page dossier, contracts, bank transfers, and a forged board resolution that ousted James. I backed it up on 2 USB drives, one for me, one for insurance. The Fraser Foundation Gala was in 48 hours. I'd walk into that ballroom, plug my USB into their AV system, and let William's lies light up the screens. My hand steadied as I packed the drives, the Polaroid of David beside me. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice, sharp and precise, like a well-aimed shot. I was Emma Mackenzie Fraser, and I was ready to pull the trigger. The Victoria Conference Center buzzed with the hum of 200 guests, their tailored suits and sparkling dresses filling the 1,000-square-meter ballroom with a false warmth that mirrored my family's lies. Chandeliers cast golden light over tables laden with BC crab cakes and Okanagan Valley Riesling, but I wasn't here for the show. My pulse pounded like a war drum as I slipped through the service entrance, my black blazer and slacks blending with the staff. The USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than the 20-kilogram rucksack I'd hauled through Kandahar. Tonight, William Fraser's carefully curated empire would crack, and I, Emma Mackenzie Fraser, was the one holding the hammer. I'd scouted the AV booth the day before, a cramped 5-square-meter room overlooking the stage. The technician, a kid barely out of UVic, didn't blink when I flashed my old forces ID and mumbled about foundation business. I plugged the USB into the HDMI input, my hand steady despite the fire in my chest. The dossier I'd built, 50 pages of James Fraser's contracts, bank transfers, and forged board resolutions, sat ready to light up the 3-meter screens above the gala. My mother's letter, the Polaroid of David Mackenzie holding me as a newborn, was queued up too. This wasn't just about William's fraud. It was about exposing the man who'd spent 32 years erasing me. Downstairs, the crowd clapped as William took the stage, his navy suit as crisp as his arrogance. His voice boomed through the speakers, smooth as the Salish sea on a calm day. "Thank you for joining us at the Fraser Foundation's annual gala," he said, his smile a polished lie. "Tonight, we celebrate legacy, strength, vision, and family." He gestured to Nathan Fraser, standing tall in a tailored tux, and Sophie Fraser, radiant in a silk gown, both basking in his approval. "My children carry our name forward." Nathan, with his leadership on city council, and Sophie, with her tireless work for Victoria's most vulnerable. I watched from the booth, my jaw tight. He hadn't mentioned me. Again. The crowd applauded, their cheers a knife twisting in the wound he'd carved at that Oak Bay dinner. I leaned into the control panel, my finger hovering over the play button. William raised his glass, his eyes gleaming with self-assurance. "To family," he said, "and to those who build something worth passing on." The screens flickered. Gasps rippled through the room as the first slide appeared, my mother's letter, blown up in stark black and white. "David, she's yours. William can never know." The words hung like a guillotine. The second slide flashed, the Polaroid, David Mackenzie in his Navy flight suit, cradling me, his eyes, my eyes, bright with pride. Whispers turned to murmurs. William froze, his glass halfway to his lips. Then came the third slide, a bank transfer from the Fraser Foundation to an offshore account, signed by William, dated the same day James was ousted. The final slide showed a forged board resolution, the signatures mismatched, the truth undeniable. The room fell silent, the kind of quiet that chokes you. I stepped out of the booth, my boots echoing on the stairs as I walked to the stage. Every eye followed me, the outcast soldier who just detonated their perfect world. I faced William, my voice cutting through the stillness like a rifle shot. "This is what your legacy looks like, William. Lies, fraud, and a daughter you buried because she wasn't yours." His face was a mask of rage, his knuckles white around the glass. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, low enough for only me to hear. "Showing them who you are," I said, my voice steady as steel. I placed a manila envelope on the podium, its weight heavy with copies of every document. "Enjoy explaining this to the board. And the Times columnist." I turned to the crowd, my heart pounding but my resolve unbreakable. For years, this man built his empire on my silence. Tonight, that ends. Nathan stood, his face red, his campaign-perfect smile gone. "Emma, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing?" I snapped, turning to him. "You're profiting off his lies, Nathan. That offshore account has your name on it too." Sophie gasped, her hands covering her mouth, but she didn't speak. Elizabeth, seated near the front, stared at the floor, her pearls glinting like tears she wouldn't shed. I walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Whispers followed me, but I didn't care. The air outside the conference center was sharp, the Pacific breeze cutting through my blazer. I'd lit the fuse, and William's world was burning. But this wasn't the end. My mother's silence, her choice to hide David Mackenzie's truth, still waited for me back at that Oak Bay house. I wasn't done fighting, not yet. The Victoria Conference Center's lights faded behind me as I drove the 5-kilometer stretch back to the Oak Bay house, the Pacific rain pelting my SUV's windshield like shrapnel. My hands gripped the steering wheel, still trembling from the gala's fallout. The screens flashing my mother's letter, David Mackenzie's Polaroid, and William Fraser's forged documents had torn through the Fraser Foundation's facade, but the war wasn't over. Elizabeth Fraser, my mother, had built her life on silence, burying the truth about my real father to protect her perfect lie. Tonight, that silence ended. I parked in the driveway, the 4,000-square-foot cedar-sided house looming like a fortress of secrets. The Canadian flag hung limp in the drizzle, a mockery of the honor I'd fought for in Kandahar. I clutched the faded Polaroid and the letter from 1993, my boots crunching on the gravel as I stormed inside. Elizabeth stood in the kitchen, her linen dress wrinkled, a half-empty glass of Okanagan Valley Pinot Noir on the 2-meter marble counter. Her pearl earrings caught the dim light, but her face was pale, stripped of its usual Victoria socialite polish. She didn't look up as I entered, just kept wiping a spotless plate like it could erase what I'd done at the gala. I slammed the Polaroid and letter onto the counter, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice raw, cutting through the hum of the rain outside. "David Mackenzie. My real father. You let William hate me for 32 years because of your lie." Elizabeth's hand froze, the plate clattering into the sink. Her eyes flicked to the Polaroid, her younger self, David, and me, a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you don't understand." "Then make me," I snapped, stepping closer, my heart pounding like a war drum. "You wrote this." "David, she's yours. William can never know. You chose him over me. You let him turn me into the family's shame, and you stood there, silent, every single time." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw cracks in her perfect facade. Tears welled, smudging her mascara, but I didn't soften. "I loved David," she said, her voice trembling like the leaves outside in the wind. "He was kind, brave, everything William wasn't. But when he died, I had nothing. William threatened to take you away, Emma. He had money, lawyers, power. I stayed silent to keep you safe." "Safe?" I laughed, the sound bitter, echoing off the cedar cabinets. "You call this safe? Growing up in a house where I was nothing but a reminder of your mistake." "William didn't just ignore me, Elizabeth. He humiliated me, over and over, and you let him. You chose his control over my truth." She reached for my arm, her fingers cold. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, tears spilling now. "I thought if I kept quiet, you'd have a family, a home." "A home?" I pulled away, my voice rising, sharp as a blade. "This place was a prison. Every dinner, every gala, every time you let William and Nathan and Sophie shine while I was erased, that wasn't a home. That was a sentence." My chest ached, the pain of her betrayal deeper than William's cruelty. He was a tyrant, but she was the one who'd chosen to lock the cage. Elizabeth sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, the words muffled but heavy. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make it work." "You didn't fix anything," I said, my voice steady now, cold as the Salish Sea. "You buried me to save yourself." I picked up the Polaroid, David's eyes staring back, and slid it into my pocket. "I'm done living your lie." I turned, my boots heavy on the hardwood, and walked toward the door. Elizabeth's sob followed me, but I didn't stop. The rain hit my face as I stepped outside, the air sharp and clean, washing away the weight of her tears. I'd faced William's empire and won, but this, facing my mother's cowardice, was a different kind of battle. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like amputation, raw and final. But I was free, and that was enough. The rain had stopped as I drove 300 kilometers west from Oak Bay, leaving the Fraser family cedar-sided prison behind. Tofino's rugged coastline stretched before me, the Pacific Ocean crashing against cliffs under a sky bruised with clouds. I'd rented a 40-square-meter guest house above a garage, its weathered cedar walls and single window overlooking the endless waves. It wasn't much, but it was mine, clean, honest, free of lies. I stood on the small balcony, the salt air sharp against my skin, and felt my shoulders loosen for the first time in years. The weight of William Fraser's insults, Elizabeth Fraser's silence, and the gilded cage of their Victoria empire was gone. I was no longer Emma Mackenzie Fraser, the outcast soldier. I'd filed the paperwork that morning to legally become Emma Mackenzie, shedding William's name like a skin I'd outgrown. David Mackenzie, my real father, had given me more in a faded Polaroid than William ever had in 32 years. I unpacked my duffel, setting the Polaroid on the windowsill, its edges curling but its truth intact. My phone buzzed, Lauren, checking in from Vancouver. "You still breathing, soldier?" she asked, her voice warm over the crackle of the line. "Better than ever," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "I'm in Tofino. New name, new start. Damn, you move fast, she laughed. What's next? Finding family that matters, I said, my eyes on the ocean. I reached out to Lily Mackenzie, David's daughter from his first marriage. She's an artist in Vancouver. We're meeting next weekend. Lauren paused, her dog barking faintly in the background. You're building something real, Emma. Proud of you. I hung up, the words settling like the tide. Lily's email had come through that morning, her tone cautious but open. I always wondered if Dad had another kid out there. Let's talk soon. It wasn't a promise, but it was a thread, a connection to David, to a legacy that didn't demand my silence. I'd spent 8 years in the Canadian Forces, coordinating supply lines under fire, but this felt braver, choosing who I called family. The next day, I sat at a Tofino cafe, the smell of roasted coffee and cedar mingling with the sea breeze. My laptop glowed with a draft I'd sent to the Times columnist under a pseudonym, a whistleblower packet exposing Williams' fraud. By noon, the first headline dropped, Fraser Foundation rocked by financial scandal. James Fraser's documents, my dossier, had done their work. Williams' empire was crumbling, his board resigning, his name splashed across every newsstand in British Columbia. Nathan's campaign was faltering, his offshore accounts now under scrutiny. Sophie's charity galas couldn't save the family's facade. I didn't smile. This wasn't about gloating. It was about truth cutting through lies like a Pacific storm. I leaned back, the 2-meter wooden table rough under my fingers, and typed an email to Lily. I attached David's Polaroid, my words simple, this is where I started. I'd like to know where you did. I hit send, the ocean roaring outside, a reminder that some things endure. My fight wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming a name, a story, a life that was mine. I'd walked away from William's cruelty, Elizabeth's silence, and a family that saw me as a flaw. In Tofino, I found space to breathe, to build, to be Emma Mackenzie. Here's the lesson I learned, and it's for anyone who's ever felt erased. You don't need permission to be who you are. Family isn't blood or a last name carved on a Victoria mansion. It's the people who see you, who fight for you, who leave room for your truth. If you're trapped in someone else's story, whether it's a parent, a partner, or a past, walk away. The truth doesn't need a stage or a chandelier. It just needs you to let it breathe. I did, and I'm still standing, stronger than ever, on a Tofino cliff where the waves don't lie. The Tofino sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Pacific Ocean in streaks of crimson and gold. I sat on a driftwood bench, 100 meters from the crashing waves, the salt air weaving through my hair like a quiet promise. The 40-square-meter guest house behind me, with its weathered cedar walls, held no trace of the Oak Bay Mansion's lies, no William Fraser's sneers, no Elizabeth Fraser's silence, no Nathan or Sophie Fraser's polished facades. I'd left that world 300 kilometers behind, along with the name that never fit. I was Emma Mackenzie now, carrying David Mackenzie's truth in a faded Polaroid and a heart that refused to break. The pain of their betrayal, the fire of exposing William's empire, the raw ache of my mother's confession, they'd forged me into something stronger, something honest. Standing here, on this rugged British Columbia shore, I felt the weight of my past lift, replaced by a stillness that wasn't surrender but survival. This journey wasn't just mine. It's for anyone who's ever felt erased, who's carried a truth too heavy to name. If you've stood in a room full of people who didn't see you, if you've fought to claim your own story, this is for you. I'm sharing mine because silence isn't strength, it's a chain. And breaking it takes courage, the kind that burns quiet but fierce. So, if this story hit you where it hurts, if it stirred something you've buried, drop a comment below. Tell me your fight, your truth, the moment you chose yourself. Hit that like button if you believe no one gets to define who you are. And if you want more stories of people rising from the ashes of betrayal, subscribe to True North Courage. We're building a community here, one that honors the battles fought in silence, the ones that shape us most. The waves roared, steady and unyielding, like the truth I'd fought for. I stood, my boots sinking into the sand, and looked out at the ocean. It didn't need to shout to be heard. Neither did I. Join me on True North Courage for more stories that cut through the noise, raw, real, and rooted in the strength of those who dare to stand alone.